Until 1958, the actual document of what became known as Hitler's second book remained hidden within the archives of captured German records in Alexandria, Virginia, where I located it. Hitler had dictated the text in 1928, but never had it published. In 1961, the Institute for Contemporary History in Munich published the book with the title Hitler's Zweites Buch, ein Dokument aus dem Jahr 1928. Hitler's second book, a document of the year 1928. The availability of a reliable English-language text is especially important for English-speaking readers and Americans in particular, because beyond the repetition of such themes from Hitler's earlier work, Mein Kampf, as the eternal struggle for land, the racial basis of all history, the need for Germany to conquer additional living space, and the endless repetition of the importance of fighting an imaginary Jewish enemy, there are also themes of particular relevance today. There is far more extensive discussion of the United States than can be found elsewhere. It is somewhat more positive than his later remarks, and it culminates in the assertion that a Nazi government of Germany would have as one of its major responsibilities the preparation of the country for war with the United States. This belief of Hitler's may make it easier for Americans to understand why, as soon as the initial rearmament steps of Hitler's government had in his eyes reached the point at which the weapons needed for war with Britain and France were well on the road to full production, he gave orders in 1937 for the development of the intercontinental bombers and super battleships he considered necessary for war against the United States. And this at a time when the United States Congress was busy passing the so-called neutrality laws. There are, furthermore, still those who imagine that Hitler hoped to reverse the losses Germany had incurred through the 1919 Peace Treaty of Versailles, as he constantly asserted in his speeches and explains in detail in this work. That was the last thing Germany needed. In his eyes, the demand for this by other German politicians only showed what utter fools they were. A National Socialist government would never follow such a route. It would fight wars for hundreds of thousands of square kilometers of land, not the little snippets that Germany had lost in 1919, and that would never suffice for the Germans to feed themselves on their own land. And if Germany was to dominate the globe, obviously, as he points out in this work, the end of each war that he would lead for massive additional land would only provide the basis for the next conflict. Both in the thinking of some and in Nazi propaganda during the war, there is the notion of Germany as a bulwark against Bolshevik Russia. In Hitler's racial perception of history, however, the Bolshevik Revolution became a racial displacement of the allegedly Germanic ruling elite of the Tsarist regime by a bunch of incompetents now ruling racial inferiors. It was, therefore, a stroke of great good luck for a German government that saw in this the easier opportunity to seize land for settlement in Eastern Europe. Neither the intercontinental bombers nor the super battleships were ever built, and the derogatory view that Hitler had of Slavic, and one should say Chinese, people turned out to be grossly mistaken, but a revolution halted in its tracks cannot be understood without attention to the beliefs of those in charge, and the goals toward which they thought themselves headed. Those who are interested in understanding one of the major and most evil figures of the 20th century will find Hitler's exposition of his own views essential. Since the 1961 German-language edition of this book quickly went out of print, and there was new evidence about the manuscript and additional relevant scholarship, the Institute of Contemporary History in Munich decided 10 years ago to include the text of the document with a revised introduction by myself, and additional notes provided by members of the Institute staff, Christian Hartmann and Klaus Alankheit, as a special volume in its comprehensive edition of Hitler's speeches and writings. The intent to publish, at the time, a carefully translated and edited in the English language that would immediately follow the original German one, was aborted by the appearance of a pirated edition, which appropriated many of my notes but was neither carefully translated nor properly annotated. In the foreword of the original German edition, I thanked a number of individuals who had helped me at that time. In addition, special thanks are due to Dr. Albrecht Tyrell, who provided me with significant archival information incorporated in the introduction, and to the staff members of the Institute of Contemporary History in Munich. I am very pleased that Enigma Books has decided to publish a carefully prepared English-language edition of this important source. The only extensive work dictated by Adolf Hitler, other than Mein Kampf, is therefore now accessible to those in the English-speaking world. Although as editor I accept responsibility for the introduction and commentary, the author, Adolf Hitler, is responsible for the content, rambling, repetitive, and highly questionable from both a factual and a moral perspective. 60 years after World War II, it is surely important to show again how directly Hitler's thinking led to the Great Catastrophe. Existence of the document naturally raises the question of why the Verlag did not publish it. It is evident from the text itself that a book was intended, not a secret paper, and Hess referred to it as such in his above-cited letter. It is also clear that after the dictation no editing, revision or correction took place as happened with the volumes of Mein Kampf. The first version of the manuscript was laid aside and was not prepared for printing, either immediately or later. There is no conclusive evidence as to why the entire book never appeared, however. Some obvious suggestions can be offered as possible reasons. It is very likely that Amann recommended refraining from publication, at least temporarily, due to the events of the summer of 1928. As head of the Verlag, he knew that Mein Kampf was very difficult to sell that year in particular. It was the worst year since the appearance of the first volume. The royalty register notes only 3,015 copies sold. A new book by Hitler would immediately have begun competing with Mein Kampf, right at this time when the party was forced, for financial reasons, to cancel its annual rally. Could the party's own publishing house be expected or asked to publish a book that would make sales of the slow-moving second volume of Mein Kampf almost impossible? Max Amann was later always praised by his wartime comrade Hitler as being a particularly good businessman. Perhaps Amann, who was familiar with the content of both the old and new books, dissuaded Hitler from publishing the work, at least at that particular point. A further reason for the failure to publish could lie in the fact that within a short time significant revisions of the manuscript would have been unavoidable. From the summer of 1929 onward, the NSDAP was engaged in fighting against the Young Plan for resettling the issue of reparations and ending the occupation, which was naturally not mentioned in the manuscript. Stresemann, who appeared in the manuscript as a key enemy, died in October 1929. Then political and economic events followed in rapid succession. Under these circumstances, Hitler would hardly have found time for the necessary revision of the manuscript. Other considerations may also have contributed to the conclusion that publication was inopportune. In 1928, Alfred Hugenberg became head of the German National People's Party, Deutschnational Volkspartei, an equally fierce and dim-witted enemy of the Republic. He allied himself with Hitler the following year, and, in the context of the referendum against the Young Plan, supported the rise of the NSDAP in opposing the Young Plan. At this time, the manuscript's effusions against the bourgeois politicians made little sense. It is of interest in this regard that precisely then, and indeed out of similar concerns, one of the few substantive changes in the text of Mein Kampf was made. An insult directed at the German bourgeoisie was deleted. In his foreword to the first edition of this manuscript, Hans Rothfuls also mentioned the possibility that foreign policy considerations might have influenced Hitler's decision not to publish the work. The already mentioned remark by Speer also cites foreign policy reasons for Hitler's failure to publish. The open endorsement of a new war to conquer huge areas and the continually recurring disavowal of the 1914 borders as the goal of German policy could have made Hitler, particularly in the first years after 1933, see a publication of his foreign policy position as inopportune. The aforementioned considerations, based on a careful examination of the situation at the time and the content of the document, offer several possible answers to the question of why the manuscript was not published during Hitler's lifetime, but without being able to fully The introduction to the first publication of this manuscript, I rejected the criticism that the document could add fuel to the fire of neo-Nazism. Those who, even today, are still deceived by Hitler's delusions will not find much in the way of stimulus in this reading. Little occasion will be found for glorification in the numerous repetitions. So, wherein lies the positive merit of publishing the English translation of the manuscript? The text constitutes an important source for the years when Hitler was trying to take power by providing an undisguised view of Hitler's ideology as well as his person. Few people have influenced the modern world in such an incisive manner as he. The twists and turns of his philosophy can be followed elsewhere as well, but here they appear before the reader uncorrected and unedited by Hitler. The document offers little beyond his assessment of the United States that is fundamentally new, but for precisely that reason, it attests to the lack of any real development in Hitler's worldview between the writing of Mein Kampf and the seizure of power in Germany in 1933. At a time when most saw his movement as unimportant or ignored it, after the elections which brought him just under 3% of the vote, Hitler dictated to his former wartime companion a book that repeats many of the thoughts he voiced frequently in those years, as if he were making a speech. The study of this material provides a significant contribution to the understanding of Hitler, the person in the struggle for power, in Germany, and provides major clues to his later policies as Reich Chancellor. Therein also lies the present significance of this book. Much has been forgotten in recent years. The problems of today demand our attention, and the sources of the misfortune are thus often overlooked. But these sources lie not only in the person of Hitler, but also in the fact that for years a man expressed in public speech perceptions and convictions like those developed in this book, that thousands paid admission to hear him, and that millions gave him their votes, and then fought hard for more than 5 years to keep him in power. In truth, Germany and the rest of the world have not yet come close to coming to terms with Hitler as a person, as leader of a great nation, and as a symbol. If, as Shakespeare said, the evil that men do lives after them, the good is often interred with their bones, then Hitler's grave is empty, but the effects of the atrocities continue to be felt. Only a deeper understanding of evil can help humanity cope morally with these consequences. May this edition contribute to that process.